For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. An interesting introduction that ends the gospel for this morning, but a charge to those who have ears to hear and a heart that loves the Lord and joins Jesus in his mission to a hurting yet beautiful world. As the gospel song, I Don't Feel No Ways Tired, says, nobody told me that the road would be easy. Good morning, all saints. On your Ministries Sunday, you may be seated. Good morning, good morning. As I told the early service, they needed to be a little bit loud because I'm still on East Coast time. I did have some caffeine, but it hasn't totally kicked in yet. So I probably need you to talk back to me this morning where the message is from ministry to mission. From ministry to mission. You know, I actually have been to All Saints. It's about 25 years ago. And the daughter of a friend of mine came out here to be discovered. And I came out to check on her. And since we were here, I was here over a weekend on a Sunday, we decided, since we were both Episcopalian, to try to find an Episcopal church. And this happened to be the closest one there. And what I remember, and it happened just a few minutes ago, after the gospel, they took all the children out. There were banners and everything, so some things don't change, and that's a good thing. The other thing I remember is that coffee hour was outside, and there was no coffee. There was plenty of lemonade, but there was no coffee. You know, it was a little different than we were both accustomed to, but, you know, All Saints was welcoming. People actually spoke to us and welcomed us back, so it's taken me 25 years to make good on that invitation. And I thank Reverend Mike and you for your invitation to come and be with you on this weekend when you celebrate your ministries. And I see there's a little timer up here. Okay. I'm good, because I was going to turn it over. The other thing is that I feel that Reverend Mike and I have known each other for years, and we have on Facebook, but this is the first time I've actually seen him in person. And so it has truly been a pleasure. You know, I'm constantly questioning what it means to be a follower of Jesus, a Christian, and what it means to actually be an Episcopalian. And I listen intently when people talk about their faith and what it means to them. And as I listen, there are times when they say things that just cause me to want to do some stuff. You know, sometimes people say things and you just want to grate your teeth. You know, you just want to lay hands on them with no oil. You know, no oil, no water. You just want to lay hands on them just for a minute and ask for forgiveness later. And so there is, and I tell folks I'm a priest, I can absolve myself, okay? So there's this one saying I absolutely despise. And if it's something that you say, I apologize, not because I despise it, but because I hurt your feelings. But I still despise it. And it's the saying that sends me for a loop, and it's, heaven's my home. Have you heard people, oh, heaven's my home. You're talking about things that are going on in the world, and someone offers up, heaven's my home. As if life right here, right now is just some minor inconvenience. until folks cross the River Jordan, that because heaven's our home, our ultimate destination, maybe, we don't really have to care about this island that we call Earth, our island home, God's creation, that because heaven's my home, I don't really have to care about you, and you don't have to care about me, because all I'm concerned about is my personal relationship with Jesus. You figure out yours, I'll figure out mine, and if we meet in heaven, that's great, but if we don't, I know I'll be there. I don't know about you. That my goal is to collect as many brownie points as I can to get to heaven. Leave this place and get my wings and walk the streets of gold. You know, there's some songs that have some really bad theology. But anyway, that's a topic for another sermon. That I don't have to be concerned with what's going on in the world. That's none of my business because heaven is my home. And all too many people have that mindset. And that's one reason we are in the fix we are in today as we look at what ails the world, this country, the society, and the church. You know, today is the next to the last Sunday in this season of creation. Did you know we were in a season of creation? Who's going to leave? What? Wait. Season of creation 2023, a season that was from September 1st until October 4th, when we are or were called to protect the earth and all that is in it. And then what happens on October 4th? We just go back to not protecting the earth because the season is over. And that's the problem with initiatives and programs. They have beginning and end dates, and at the end date, we just go like, okay, I'm going back to what I was doing before this all started. Whatever normal was, right? And so what is our responsibility, or do we have any responsibility to God's creation and God's creatures if heaven is my home? Are we brave enough to voice that question aloud and deal with the answers? You know, many of those answers about heaven's my home and some other stuff have actually been taught by the church, right? You learned it in the church. Right? Somebody said it was in the Bible, and they said, wait, I don't know exactly where, but it's in the Bible somewhere. Right? But as we learn from Revelation this morning, John of Patmos says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and I saw a new Jerusalem descending from heaven, from God, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, the home of God is among the women born. God will dwell with them as their God. So just maybe, depending on how we interpret this, how we've been taught to interpret this passage, we can actually destroy this earth, and Emmanuel will bring a new one, because the first heaven and earth have passed away. That perhaps we don't really have to be concerned with climate change because Emmanuel will fix all this with a new earth, a new Jerusalem that descends from heaven. And so I ask you, what do you believe and why do you believe it? What do you believe and why do you believe it? And if we delve into these verses, we just might come away with an understanding that the New Jerusalem will actually descend to this earth, a redeemed earth, this earth that we inhabit, that when it actually comes down to this earth, what remains of it, in whatever condition we have left it, and that Emmanuel, God with us, will tabernacle with us, will camp out with us on whatever we have left. That may even include how many of us we have not destroyed, depending on how we have interpreted Revelation. There's some of us who believe that all of that will be replaced, so I don't really have to care about it. And maybe this is good news for some people, so we can do whatever we want, because as the group Canton Spirituals sing, fix it, Jesus. like you said you would. This is not my problem. So we can just leave it all up to Jesus. But for others, with what my grandmother called home training. Y'all know what home training is. When company's coming, you ought to straighten up. Put your best foot forward, show your best, particularly when this company is coming to judge, to take account. When those books of Revelation are open for review, and I tell folks, don't bring any white out. Because if there are too many blank spaces, somebody will say, what was here? Must have been something you weren't supposed to do because you whited it out. But when those books are open for review, how we have lived our lives in response to all that God has given us and how we have treated all that God has given us will be assessed. What grade will we receive? As we were saying this morning, we don't hear a whole lot in church about Revelation. Revelation scares us. So we don't hear a whole lot. Will Emmanuel be pleased with what we have done to and with God's creation? Will it be a place where God will even want to tabernacle? Which leads us to today's gospel. And sometimes, as we frequently hear passages, as we are taught what they mean, we can forget their underlying tones, their purposes. And here we have the Beatitudes, the beginning of the Sermon of the Mount. Have you ever wondered, did Jesus think this was a sermon? Right? He said, now I have a sermon. It has 3 points. Oh, no, it has more than 3 points. And so folks, okay, we got to sit down for the sermon. You know, but we come to this point from chapter 4. Chapter 4, where Jesus has convinced folks who would become disciples, who would become learners, students, perhaps, just perhaps, co-revolutionaries, convinced them to leave everything, to leave home, to leave jobs, family, and follow him. Follow him where? Follow him why? Fish for people. What in the world does that mean? Because we know the story, we tend not to ask questions, to push back, to say, wait a minute, can we back this up a minute and see what is really going on? You know, we forget, or maybe we just haven't been told, that these first followers who have been called have never seen Jesus before. They have not witnessed, experienced any of his miracles. They have heard none of his teachings. And Jesus gives no explanation, like, follow me. Come on, follow me. He's gonna not know. You're minding your own business, trying to get enough fish and not to go hungry, and here is Jesus. Who is this guy? They're not looking for something to fill their lives. They already have jobs. Yet we want to believe that by the miracle of his words, the sound of Jesus' voice, follow me, people just drop everything and go somewhere they know not where. But let us just assume that this is actually how it happened. That Jesus' call is so intrusive, it's just so disruptive to one's life, it's just so compelling that you drop everything and follow, still not knowing where you are going or even asking, who are you? Is Jesus' invitation to us to follow him that compelling that we will drop everything? That we will turn and go in a new direction. And so now he has this men, again it's men because that's what we've been taught, okay? We'll just go there. These men are following him, not questioning, not asking anything, but as they walk with Jesus, they see him teaching, they see him healing folks, and all of a sudden there are great crowds of people who are following. Maybe this guy is actually somebody, right? And so here he's going with these folks, and others are following him, and just perhaps Jesus figures he needs to give those whose lives he has disrupted some type of explanation. Because, you know, church people, they get impatient. They're not zombies following blindly. Well, most aren't. But before these guys change their mind, Jesus needs to tell them something. At some point, inquiring minds want to know something. At a minimum, when do we eat? Or like kids on a trip, are we there yet? What have you been taught about this passage, this call? What do you believe and what do you need to believe? You know, there are times when having deep theological discussions are warranted there, and then there are other times when you go like, not today, Jesus. And I remember a time there was this discussion on poverty, why people are poor, how they become poor, what the church's call to the poor should be. And one woman, to end the discussion, it's almost like heaven's my home. She's going to end the discussion now. She's tired of the talk. And she stated, Jesus said, the poor will always be with you. I mean, you've heard that before, right? It's in the Bible. Case closed. No further discussion. Jesus has declared poverty as an ever-present reality. And when you find yourselves in these discussions, you know when to continue and you know when to hand the conversation partners over to Jesus, because there is nothing you can say, nothing you can do that will change their minds. However, those with ears to hear get an indication of how these folk live their lives, in this case, how they will treat the poor. That somehow Jesus had ordained, had proclaimed, had mandated that there must always be the poor. But here is the question. There is always a question, possibly a thunderbolt kind of question, so you might want to make some room so you won't be hit. What kind of God would do that? Perpetually condemn those created in God's image to be without what is needed to live, to thrive, to not be able to access what is needed to thrive from God's own bounty. What kind of God would do that? Perhaps, just perhaps, instead of proclaiming, mandating poverty, Jesus was making an observation. Sometimes sarcastically, maybe ruefully. Instead, Jesus might have said, because of systems human beings have put in place, there will always be the poor. No child is born poor. They are made poor by human systems. Your God has created enough for everyone, and yet some of you hoard. Some of you are greedy. Some of you need to be on top by creating systems that place others at the bottom. Because of human beings, people are poor. And Jesus turns and says, people are poor because of you, not because of God. Just suppose that was also in the Bible. Rather than declaring, Jesus is observing and commenting on how God's people have turned from what God wants for God's people. Would it make a difference? But as we turn to the soon-to-be disciples, that's how we can interpret this talk to those who have decided to take a chance on this stranger. Jesus is providing the orientation for this new job the soon-to-be disciples have accepted. This is the onboarding process. What you need to know, information that is important, and if necessary, you can decide, if after you hear it, I'm going back to fishing. I'm going back to collecting taxes. I mean, you can turn it down and go back to your old job. You know, sometimes we have been taught or told that the words follow me are an imperative, as if those who are called have or had no agency, that they could not say no. And if that is the case, then they are zombies. They have no control over their bodies, their thoughts, their lives. But it would seem that follow me is an invitation to be part of something greater than themselves, something greater than ourselves. And every day we hear that invitation anew. Follow me. All saints, as we look at your ministries, it's evident that you answer that call anew every single day, that perhaps you actually believe that when Jesus returns and there is this new Jerusalem, that you will have worked to ensure that there is some place for the new Jerusalem to land and be welcoming space for Emmanuel, God with us. That you have cared for and continue to care for God's creation and God's creatures, those who bear God's image. And so in these opening lines to this sermon, which is really a job description, Jesus decides to speak with the new recruits because this invitation is something that will shake up their lives, turn their lives upside down. This is a metanoia moment. They may not know it right now, but it will happen soon enough. If, when we accept the call to follow me, our lives will be turned upside down. Those of you who remember the series Mission Impossible that ran from 1966 to 1973, remember the opening line. Good morning, Mr. Phelps. Your mission, should you choose to accept it. And then there would be some ridiculously impossible task that is not unlike what Jesus is offering those called. And of course, Jesus rarely gets straight to the point, and it seems that he is declaring, proclaiming that those who are poor, who suffer, who experience injustice, those who are persecuted, that somehow they'll be rewarded at some point date in the future. That their suffering will not be ended on this earth, but at some point in the future, they will be rewarded for all this hell they're going through. And again, I ask, inquiring minds want to know, what kind of God is that? Suffer until I get back. Suffer until I get back. And so Jesus continues with the orientation. Let me tell you what you're in for. Because you have chosen to hang out with me. Let me tell you what my mission is. And when I tell you what my mission is, you will know who I am. I'm going to turn this world right side up. I'm going to tick off every single person who believes that he, she, them is in charge, who believe that they have a right to misuse, abuse God's people, that they have a right to misuse God's creation. All those who have been sent to the bottom of society's ladder by those who believe they're on top will know how it is to be on the bottom. They are in for a shock. Should you accept this mission, you will be hated. You will probably be hunted. You might even lose your life. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. If you consent, please sign on the dotted line. But no, this is not going to be easy. Now suppose, instead of the vows we take at baptism, this is what you heard. Would our response be, yes, I will with God's help? Or you're like, can I think about this for a minute? I mean, how do congregations today hear Jesus' pronouncements? On which side of the dividing line are we? Are we the meek, or are we those who trample on the meek? Are we hearing some eschatological end-time pronouncement? Or are we rehearing the words, the kingdom, the reign of God is at hand. It is here right now in this place. Is it here and now, and also coming to its total completion? When the New Jerusalem descends from heaven and God takes up residence with God's people, all of God's people, not just Christians, certainly not just Episcopalians. Let's be real. There are some people who are content, who are willing to wait for that day, for that total completion, those who will turn it all over to the Lord. But there are those who believe, who work for on earth as it is in heaven. On All Saints, on this day when you celebrate your ministries, you minister in and to the world. You are in that number. You lead people to see that heaven can be now. But I'm going to bump it up a little bit. Can you move from ministry to mission? Can you move from ministry to mission? There's a book called Toxic Charity. And a lot of churches do charity. But you know what happens with charity? Charity makes people dependent on the provider. We have served 50,000 bagged lunches over the year. That's all about us and not about the person. We ought to ask, why do they need to come here for that bagged lunch? And do as Jesus did, fix it so we don't have to do that ever again. Our ministries turn to mission, and we put ourselves out of business. We don't want people dependent on us to come and get that meal, to come and get those clothes, to come and get that shower. Why can't folks take shower in their own place? Right? Here we are. And I borrow from Father Richard Rohr as he describes people who are in the church who are able to maintain and retain a certain distance, who are able to be inside, outside people, who are able to walk a narrow line as the prophets walk and are able to critique the church, tell the church that it needs to do more. Bump it up. Bump it up. I mean, there are those who are able to question and push back, challenge, and push God's people to do everything in their power to ensure that God's justice is a reality right here, right now. They are able to make the step from ministries to mission, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets before you. You walk on an edge, all saints. You are edge walkers. And this is liminal space in which transformation actually occurs, where you actually find Jesus. All saints, you make Jesus real right here, right now. Under the leadership of clergy and lay who have accepted Jesus' invitation to follow me, you do not follow along with the status quo. You don't swallow the version of religion that waits for Jesus to fix it. And in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, Jesus says, I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. That was his mission. When Jesus spoke of the kingdom of God, the reign of God, he was expressing his vision of a profound transformation of human beings and human systems, social, political, economic, and religious, that would fully express the character and nature of God, that would be a God of love. And to do this, Jesus said that he would tick off people, and he did. He was hated, and people plotted to get rid of him because he challenged them to turn the world right side up. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets. Anyone who truly follows Jesus will be persecuted. They will be hated. And people will try to get rid of you. Because transformation makes people uncomfortable. And to do all of this, Jesus worked toward a creation of a new kind of community dedicated to the values of compassion, generosity, peace, and justice. Follow me. He was creating a movement, not a church building, but a movement for change. Follow me. He was transforming the lives of God's people into agents of love, that all-encompassing radical love. You know, somehow I think you might have done a little history, gone back into history and recaptured the zeal of activist priests and lay people from the 1950s and the 1960s, just that long ago. And there were some good things about the 50s and 60s. Okay? But it was a time when a holistic approach to urban ministry began to take root in pockets across the Episcopal Church that spoke to the need to address the conditions of poverty and inequality rather than to simply provide charity. All Saints, you follow those who question the very nature of the church's mission to modern America. You, All Saints, are answering the questions asked in 1950 by Bishop Will Scarlett of the Diocese of Missouri, who declared a need for prophets, people unafraid to risk criticism or censure by witnessing to a radical vision of society. You, All Saints, answer the questions he posed. Who will try to see the world as God sees it? Who will speak for, and you have to remember the language, who will speak for human brotherhood, a brotherhood transcending divisions of race and class? Again, remember, this is 1950. Who will contend for the individual person and his dignity and his rights against the powerful who would crush him? Who will try to sense the direction in which the kingdom of God lies and give mankind a push along that path? You, All Saints, are moving from ministry to mission, but you're going to get pushback from folks who don't want to go there. Not unlike what happened to these priests and bishops back in the 1950s and 60s, their congregations told them, "You're supposed to be for us. Why are you out there with those people?" You know your history, then you know what you're in for. As you try to make Jesus' mission real right here, right now. You make visible what the world could be if people would just accept Jesus' invitation to follow me. If more folks would sign on the dotted line and turn the world right side up. And for all you have done, and I know you're going to move from ministry to mission, but for right now, for all you have done, making the world different, I want you all to just give yourselves a hand. Give yourselves a hand. You've signed on the dotted line. Just know that they're going to be the haters. Jesus had haters, so you're in good company. You can move from ministry to mission. Amen.